So firstly, thank you everybody for showing up. It's obviously a pleasure to be back in Australia at any given time, and certainly to be in Brisbane. And for those of you who traveled up to be here, thank you, and for everyone in this room. And of course for the thousands and thousands of people who are online today to hear this morning, and those that will watch it as we move forward. So let's get down to business. We've got a lot to talk about, not only what we did in 2022, but certainly what we're doing in 2023. Here's the agenda. You can read that real quick. You'll get every one of those slides as a heading, so no need to belabor the point there. I want to start with this video. It gives a good backstory of where we are today. To each lights. I think the key point there is that we have created something so novel and unique. This stuff is the real deal. It's the only product of its kind out there. We own the IP, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But let's look quickly back at 2022. I really want to get down to business on 23. So last year was a year of a tiger. That's important because that means a year of tiger, things move quickly, and this team moved really, really fast. Obviously, a lot of news events. We lost a legend, of course. Queensland does what it always does, and apparently we've got a better future. Jury's out on that. Like I said, Queensland does what it always does. If you didn't know, I'm from Queensland originally. There was obviously this huge disruption in the global system with this crazy event that's going on right now. Important to us, of course, we do patients in Tbilisi, Georgia, and you'll see some of those studies. So we are right next door to that, obviously on the border with Russia. And our physicians, all of our team come from the US to this environment 3 times now during the course of this outrageous war. There was a end of an era, I guess. Everyone has an opinion on that. And importantly, the global population went past 8 billion people. Why does that matter? Well, it matters a lot for a bunch of reasons, but certainly this one down here. Population is getting bigger and older. The demographics and the mega trends are certainly moving towards better treatments. But if you worked in our company, sleep was an option, and most people chose not to take that option. And we continued making a cake, and I use this analogy because I remember 4 years ago, we were transitioning businesses, as John talked about. And if you're a newer investor to the story, you may not know that. If you've been on the register for a while, you will know that. This company was in a very different space. It was a very different company. It was a bit of a penny dreadful. But we had to turn it around, and that's not a small task with small resources. We had really high-quality technology with ADAPT, but that's all we had. There was no TAVR, there was no mention of a strategy to really develop the investment thesis. A lot of folks get caught up in the penny dreadful healthcare stocks on the ASX and may not necessarily believe when you're making the cake that it's actually legit. And hopefully 2022 was a year that we showed that not only did we develop a product, it also was a product that was super competitive from a clinical point of view and a commercial point of view. And we've even discovered a few surprises around it as we've moved forward. So let's get down to business and talk about the financials. I want to do this fairly quickly because it's a function of the annual report and you've all read it. There were some pretty major milestones last year, but the ones I get really excited about, other than the patients coming online, which of course is always a source of pride for us, is that we brought in some larger investors who came in. Perceptive here, L1 came in for the second time. We're really starting to see follow-on investments from institutions both in New York and Australia that starts to support the investment thesis. What I also like about these funds is that we are very much working with funds, particularly in the top 5 or 6 shareholders of the company, who have either are physician-led or have physicians in their team. This really matters when you're talking about healthcare products. If you're not a physician, maybe it's hard to get your head around some of these things. Share price was up 71% last year. That's dramatic because it was a terrible, terrible market globally, and particularly for healthcare stocks around the world. We had some revenue. It's kind of inconsequential, but it's there because that's obviously not a key focus. The headcount floated along at a very reasonable number. I'll talk about that in a minute. And we raised, obviously, capital. The market cap went up 115%. Obviously, in a bad market, that's a good outcome, particularly as you're going through the development curve. And that's really been driven by several events, but certainly patience. The increase in share price, although 71% last year, which was dramatic compared to the indexes, was coming off the back of a 246% increase the prior year. So these are, of course, as a CEO, great numbers to see, driven by the increasing credibility and legitimacy of the science that we're delivering. And, of course, the investments were really going into the projects. So you see that we're really driving most of the dollars coming in to accelerate the clinical development path. Now, keeping in mind that we are doing in 3 or 4 years what typically takes 7 or 8 years, all right? And that's a legit number. It comes from the big med techs that we associate with. That's how long it takes them to get to the point in humans that we are. We didn't cut corners to get there. We just worked really fast with a lot less. Some of these companies, take Edwards, one of our competitors out there, has something like 2,000 engineers. We have 12, all right? So if you factor in 3 to 4 years discount time so far, plus the cost per year to run that, we're probably hundreds of millions of dollars right now under where we would be to get a product like this to where it is. Not mentioning that it's already a clinically superior product. So yeah, you can see the increase in money that's going into the projects over year on year. But what really I want to land this message with you is that we have an incredibly diverse workforce and a real team of rock stars, which wasn't always the case. A couple of things to note here. When we were going back to the early stage of this company called Anteris, we had some different businesses. We had about 120 people here. If you calculated the dollar per head count, it was a lot lower. We're at 67 now. They're doing the work of 167, and that's serious. I mean, the amount of stuff that's being developed here just doesn't happen in the speed that we're doing at, unless you have the quality of staff. And it's not just the quality. These people are global people. They're coming from global corporations like myself. They know how to do this. They've done it before, but they're excited, right? They know what they're working on. They know that it's the #1 product in the space. They know what the doctors are saying. They want to be on this project, and so they're motivated to move it forward very quickly. On the back of that, although we're predominantly domiciled in the States and the US, in Australia, our team come from all over the world. And that makes for a really dynamic, interesting workplace. Of course, Australia is highly multicultural, as is the US. But it matters. It matters to the teams, and it certainly adds a dynamic that I've rarely encountered in my career. The market cap is obviously continuing to move with that share price. That's normal. What I really want to point out here is when we consolidated this stock several years back in February 20, there was a lot of consternation from some of the shareholders about moving out of the kind of the penny dreadful status and into something with a different valuation. Everyone said we'd go backwards. The folks that want to trade this stock on a daily basis probably are the wrong investors when they're trading penny dreadfuls, because the company didn't have a lot of legitimacy. So you trade that company for what it is. But you see the consolidation impact. Now, there are obviously some major events that happened along the way, but the legitimacy of consolidation has really moved that market cap up. It's put us on the radar of the bigger funds in Australia, and certainly brought in bigger funds in the US as well. So it matters. It's the difference between, I guess, the kind of investors that are in this room, informed investors who look at a stock with our price and know why it's there, as opposed maybe to dealing in 20-cent stocks and hoping that they don't fall over. Now, the market, we've returned 220% since we got rid of CardioCel, and that's important as well. CardioCel is a fantastic product. The core of that product is the adapt tissue, which we use in the DurAVR valve as well. So it's fantastic technology. You need a bigger infrastructure than this company had when we took it over to be able to be competitive in that space. So when we got rid of that, it was really good luck in terms of timing, right? We took a couple of years to establish the CardioCel brand in the market through science. We had to build credibility in order to be able to do a deal. We did a deal with a great company out of Boston, LeMaitre, but we actually did it a month before COVID hit. And what that meant was a very different path for us. I'd love to claim that I was super bright and got that right. It was just good luck. But what it meant was we were able to get rid of a whole lot of costs and bring in non-dilutive capital, which funded us through a very difficult period, which was COVID. And those costs, of course, were reps and headcount that would otherwise have been redundant, because during COVID, the reps couldn't go into hospitals. So you had to pay them and keep them there. So that certainly made a significant difference. The partnership, I couldn't be happier than the guys we work with, LeMaitre. They are #1 in the space, and they're doing great jobs with the product out there. The share price, and obviously the market cap follows the share price. What I was excited about in 23 was we hit the All Ordinaries. And I think that's a really big milestone for this company, considering where we came from. But also, more importantly, we outperformed all the major indices throughout the year. And that's, again, in very difficult markets, when you're outperforming the NASDAQ Healthcare Index and so on, it's a sign of where the company is headed. On the back of that, we outperformed the major competitors in this space. We know all of these folks. They know us. We talk to them fairly regularly. But you can see during a difficult year, these companies that have big revenue were not outperforming, and they were in the serious negatives. And we continued a positive trajectory during a bad market. Again, you see that legitimacy coming through with the results. I often get questioned about capital raises. Obviously, we're generally a non-revenue company. This is a development company. You have to be invested or not in a company where you know the upside is dramatic if a product comes to market. There are a lot of companies where that's not the case. This is not one of them. We are clinically de-risked to the point where this product is not an if, it's a when. I can say that because I spent 25 years in global big pharma around the world. I've launched 36 drugs, big ones, $5-6 billion per year. And I know where you are along the development curve with the regulators, with the FDA, and so on. A drug at this stage is more risk. A medical device is a lot less risk. This product's coming. It's clinically de-risked down to the point of 1%, I guess, whatever. But the capital raises are, quite dramatic. This is only 18 months ago, October 21. We were raising at $8. Then we raised at $15 in March. Then we raised at $24. Okay, there were some options behind that. But I look at the options just as a pretty much a guaranteed source of future capital. We need future capital. It has to happen. This share price is still chronically undervalued for a product that's worth billions of dollars. So we are going to get those options back, in which case, it all works out for us. But we've got about a 20%, 200% increase over that cap raise price in the last 18 months. Obviously, as a CEO, you want to raise off a bigger base and you want to be able to raise the dollars to run the company. Otherwise, none of us win. We go nowhere. And I think that's a really good outcome. Again, just indicative of where we are as a company. Ownership still 65% in Australia. There's a growing number outside, 24% in the US. What's interesting here is that our big supporters continue to support, and I just want to call these ones out, as well as lots of other folks here. Perceptive just came in on their second round. This is the highest performing hedge fund in New York for the last 25 years straight. All right, this is a very credible fund in New York. L1 Capital has been a fantastic supporter. They've come in several times. L1, and I used to get this question earlier, L1 certainly at times buys on market as well. People may not see that or they don't know what's happening, but these folks are supporting us on market in the last 12 months. SIO Capital was originally our biggest investor, but also been a great supporter, has come in on several rounds. Physician-led, physician in the team, physician in the team. I love talking to these guys because when you talk medicine and science with these guys, they know that it's real, as opposed to some folks who maybe don't have that background who maybe struggle to get their head around some of it. And you see also what's happening here is the institutional support is growing year on year, and that's obviously what you want to see. Our big holders are buying, they're certainly not selling. So when you see fluctuations on the market, it's not coming from the big end of the register. I know that because I look at the sales every single morning, which are 3 days old. So you know most of these folks here. This is a quick look at the register, and I think down to number 4, number 5, we've got 4 of the 5 here are either physician-led or have a physician in the team. So that makes a big difference. And of course, these guys are generally buying, not selling. We've had a couple of institutions join of late. This one out of Europe is just very recent. I've taken up a fairly big position as well. So we're getting more and more institutional support, and it's coming in the last year, more funds from the US as well. So let me talk quickly about the global population. This one's an important one. 800 million people are above 65. Now, obviously, there's a connection to what we do. 2 to 5% of that number have aortic stenosis globally. It goes up when you hit 75. People are, of course, living a lot longer. So 75 is an easy number to achieve. 12 to 15% over 75 get that, have stenosis. So I want to break down the market for you to give you a feeling of what we're invested in. This is obviously no longer an Australian story. It's a global story. Right? This is a product that is known globally by physicians who are globally number 1, number 2, 3 in the space globally in the world. And you have to look at the global numbers as well around the disease state. So we just talked about population. The available patient pool is anywhere between 10 and 30 million people. Okay, it's hard to really do a proper sizing on this, but roughly from an epidemiology point of view, that's what we're talking about, 10 to 20, 30, it's a massive market. Now, considering that covers big markets like India and China as well, but you've got to look at the big markets, the US, Germany, UK, France. They're chronically undertreated, all right? So the market, just in the markets we can operate in, is massive. 1% of the global market today is 3.5 to 7 billion. That's US dollars. Okay, so 10 billion Aussie already at 1%. At 10%, we're talking 100 billion Australian dollars, and this just is the US, UK, France, Germany, and so on. This is not talking about markets you can't get at. So it is chronically underdiagnosed. That's changing very quickly, by the way. So we talk about the market being 10 billion by 2028, around this time frame. But in fact, when you size this market correctly, when you look at the patient number, when you look at the disease state, incidence and prevalence, it is much, much bigger. It's to say that the current companies that are in the space have done an okay job, but they haven't done an amazing job at expanding this market over a decade. And I can say that coming from my background, we really are only scratching the surface. It is changing, and we're driving a lot of that dialogue as Anteris on the global podiums right now with the doctors we work with. Okay, so big news, we've hit 21 patients now, and I want to talk about this number because If you've been invested in the drug industry, which is where I came from, 21 patients is not a significant number. And the reason for that is the way you do studies with a chemical, with a compound, with a drug are very different to the way you do studies with a medical device. A compound in a big study can react differently in every single patient. And I've had studies at phase 3, which can be 5,000, 10,000 patients, that have gone wrong, and you've had to pull the drug because you cannot change a compound, and you cannot account for the impact of that drug in every single patient. So you have to do those big studies, and you do see things that you didn't expect, that you didn't see in phase 2. However, and when I talked about us being medically de-risked earlier, a medical device, in our case a valve, does this. It's a mechanical process from here. There is no surprises. You put it in, it works. How you land the valve, that's a function of delivery system. But you're not going to put this in 50, 100, 200 patients and find you suddenly have a different result. Not possible. So I think a lot of folks looking at a medtech company maybe not understanding how de-risked it really is compared to a biotech or a drug company who have much, much different clinical risks. Our risk of clinical failure at this point is 1% or less. Don't ask me how I calculated that because I made it up, but it's really that low, and that's just based on where I've come from. Where I would say in the drug industry, at phase 3, where you're doing 5,000 or 10,000 patients, your risk of clinical failure is probably 40 to 45%. So it's a very big difference. And by the way, in this space, 21 is a legitimate number. It's a big number. A lot of deals get done around that number. So we've got the 12-month follow-up out to on the first 2 cohorts of patients. You can read these details later. They're not that interesting. What is interesting is here. We haven't yet done the 1-year follow-up on the second group because it's about now. So it takes about another month from now to do it. I did get some data at about 4 o'clock this morning on this group here, but it was too late to incorporate. What do we really need to look at here? The things that we measure in this disease, one's called the EOA. It's a defining factor of the disease. That's just basically the measurement of the vessel before you treat it. Now, at a normal state, before a patient has stenosis, that number should be around about 2 centimeters squared. Okay? When you get serious stenosis, that number is going to drop. When you're at 0.65 to 0.65, that's severe disease. Okay, so that means you've got a very much diminished opening in the vessel, and that means the pressures are going to go right up because the hole is, of course, small. And there's a big workload from the left ventricle trying to push that blood through the aorta. So you see here at baseline, the first 13 patients now are in the severe range. They've got a small calcified annulus. And then over that 30 days, 6 months, and 1 year, only 5 at 1 year because we've got the second group, you see consistently a diameter of 2. That's a fantastic outcome. Just for context, we have a thing called the indexed EOA. Anything above 1 is rarely seen with any product out there, but we're consistently well above 1 with these patients. That's an important marker. The other thing that's measured is blood pressure. It's called the mean pressure gradient. It's measured in millimeters of mercury. And I want you to look at this one. So around about 40 millimeters of mercury is severe disease. Okay, once you get above 40, so don't worry about what it all means, just the numbers for context. Normal is 5 to 10 when you're healthy. Our patients on average on this first 13 were 50, so they're very severe. These are very sick patients. And consistently over that 30 days, 6 months, and 1 year, you see a really great pattern under 9 for that pressure. Remember, 5 to 10 is normal, and these are very sick patients. They also have other things going wrong with them that can affect this number as well. So these are amazing outcomes. The physicians who look at this stuff, who are number 1, number 2, number 3 in the world, of course now they know that this data is going to be always consistent, but in the early days they wouldn't believe the data. They also saw some of this stuff and said it's not possible because they haven't seen it before, and that's just the way of the world. The other things you can measure when you look at these patients, this is really a disease of symptoms as well. Obviously it's fatal if left untreated, but one of the symptoms of this kind of stenosis is that you are unable to exercise. You're very short of breath, and I don't mean running around the block. I mean going to the shops, going to the bathroom. Can have a real effect. They're short of breath, and when you're elderly and you're sick, the less you move, the sicker you get. So movement and being able to have your body move is really important. As I say, motion is lotion. So when you look at this, we've got a 40% increase from baseline in exercise ability. This is a standardized test you use medically, 6-minute walk test. But our patients, again, only the first group, are significantly increasing their ability to walk over 12 months. This is really good. It not just shows how well the product is working, but it also shows that these patients are getting better on so many other fronts. And critical, they'll live longer if they can exercise. The other one that's really important is the quality of life score. This is a subjective tool that is used in a lot of clinical studies, both in drugs and in devices. Patients fill this out over a 12-month period, and it's a bunch of questions just basically relating to quality of life and how they feel. No surprises, when you see that they can exercise and walk like that, your quality of life score goes up dramatically. Again, in a disease that's fatal, this is dramatic. Often you don't see this because patients might get a replacement valve, but they're not feeling much better because they're not getting the same results you see here. So cohort 3, we did this 3 weeks ago. Fantastic outcomes. I would say we had the best outcomes of any group, and probably because the doctors are just getting a little bit more dialed in with delivering. Obviously, there is a learning curve here. It's a new product. And we had a few objectives for cohort 3, obviously prepping some doctors for the EFS study. We take all US doctors, we go to Tbilisi, Georgia. There's a team of 6 doctors there from the US. This is our CMO, Chris Maduri. This gentleman here is involved in the EFS. This is Sushil from Columbia University, also in the EFS. So these guys are getting it right. But also we make tweaks and changes. You might not know the device. Each time we go into patients, the delivery system, especially the catheter, which I'll show you in a minute, we make some changes. Doctors say, maybe we need to shorten this, change that. And so there are little tweaks that happen along the way before we get there, and then you have to test them. We obviously test them in animals and everything else first, but then you get it right. So there's a bunch of objectives there. These were the best results that we ever had, and you don't have to be a physician. Dr. Barrett, you're in the room, you know what this is. But we talk about this being a disease of calcification. That's what you're looking at, that white stuff. So these vessels are not round when you go in there. When a patient is sick, you are dealing with, I would say, a round peg in a square hole. It's not an easy process. And again, some of these patients wouldn't typically make studies. Right? They're actually too sick. They have too many comorbidities. Again, the general stats were in that kind of 74, 75 age group. But this last 8, we saw dramatic results. And like I said, I think the doctors are just getting better dialed in with the delivery system. They're landing the valve really well. Baseline EOAs, again, very small, above 2. It's incredible. Index EOAs, of course, above 1 again. And look at that. Look at the mean pressure gradient. It's incredible. Plus 50s down to 8s. So these, to grasp the significance of these numbers, I think is really important. You do not see these numbers ever in the history of treating this disease with any product that's available. These are dramatic, and they are curative. Now, if you were treating with another valve, a company valve, you might have this number up at 15 or even 20 when the patient gets off the table. So it does matter. We had 8 successful patients. 7 of these were in the study, and one of them was a compassionate use, and I want to talk about her because it's a source of pride for everyone in the company. We had 0 central leak, no pacemakers at discharge, just pretty standard stuff to report on. 0 intra-op PVLs and 1 mild PVL at the end, which is pretty normal, but very good results. So our compassionate use lady, let me talk about this patient. This is a patient that doesn't go into the study. Her results don't go into the study, although they could have. We were asked to treat her in the environment we're in because they don't have available TAVRs for these patients. That's why we're able to operate there. They have a program that's affiliated with the US. She would probably have 3 to 4 weeks of life left. She was incredibly sick. She was an NYHA class 3. She had what's called a bicuspid. Your valve has 3 leaflets, hopefully, in your heart right now if you're healthy. When you get a lot of calcium, 2 of those will join together, so you end up with 2. It's called a bicuspid. Makes sense. When you get, not every patient is like that when you treat them, but when you get a bicuspid, it's a really challenging patient. Her ejection fraction was 33%. That's how much her ventricle is pushing. Any number below 50 is really bad. Okay, this lady's at 33, just to give you some idea. A lot of hypertension going on. Her mitral valve was a mess, low ejection fraction, and obstruction of the coronaries. Okay, so an incredibly sick lady. And here she is after procedure. She went from 0.6 up to 2.10, so a normal opening on that valve. Her mean pressure gradient, although at 19 obviously is above the normal range, it's still incredible because she was at 79. Remember, 40 to 50 is really sick. So we've got a patient here who is, for sure wouldn't be with us today after 3 weeks. And here she is. She gave me her permission. She was a delightful lady. She discharged that afternoon, 48 hours after the procedure. She was out of hospital. I think all of us invested in this company. You're obviously here for a bunch of reasons. One of them, of course, is to get a return on that investment. That's important. But it feels good to know that right there is the product that has taken these 4 years to put together, that has kept this patient and 20 other patients alive, for that matter. And this is a patient who wouldn't be here. I can imagine her coffee club in Georgia, in Tbilisi, because we have 6 doctors from the US at the highest level operating on her. You can't get this team together in the States. They will never be in the same OR in the US, let alone anywhere else. The Georgian doctors are in there with us. They're great people, but of course, all of the team comes from the US that operate on her and all the patients. So she has some of the best operators in the world. Of course, it's sponsored by a company. There's no cost for the patient. But it's a feel good for all of us, I think, to know that we're getting this kind of result. We're not selling widgets here. I said it last year, but it means a lot to me. So we're able to put together all of the patients at 48 hours. Obviously, we've just done a new group a few weeks back, so we don't get their data for a while, but we can see them all at 48 hours. Again, pretty consistent with the number of patients. But again, you can see here at the 48 hours, so we're looking at 20 patients now, we're getting these consistent EOAs above 2, that's the opening, indexed EOAs above 1, mean gradients coming from the 50s down to the middle of the 8s. So this is 20 patients now. You're seeing it every single time. It's not a fluke. This valve obviously works very differently. So that said, why does it matter? We can read the results. If you're a physician, you know what it means. If you're a non-physician, you just have to believe what I'm saying, but trust me, the data is legit. This gentleman here, Professor Marty Leon from Columbia University, is considered to be the grandfather of TAVR. He is the preeminent #1 expert in the world. His opinion matters, and it matters a lot. If you're invested in any other healthcare companies, it's really important that you look at their advisory boards. These are people that are on the global stage, the global podiums. They're published hundreds and hundreds of academic papers in the journals. Their opinion matters, and in fact, it's the only opinion that matters. And folks in Wall Street certainly know these guys as well. The big funds who invest in healthcare, they know these guys. So Marty is on our advisory board. He doesn't give his opinion easily because his reputation has taken years and years to build. He's not going to throw it away on a fly-by-night product. What I would say is we were recently at the Euro PCR meeting, very important medical meeting 2 weeks ago. Marty is considered #1 in the world, was asked by the organizers to give his opinion on the top 3 transformational products in structural heart at the moment, and one of those products was ours. There were no other TAVR products, by the way, in his opinion, and there wouldn't be. But that shows you the scale of what's been achieved here. When this guy, the #1 in the world, says this is a transformational product for treating this disease, he's not kidding. Now, I want to run this interview for you, and I'll just explain about, real quick, who this doctor is. Rebecca Hahn is considered the #1, #2 in the world echocardiographer. So she does the images. She's a physician. But the imaging that you see, that you'll see later on, is done by physicians. So you've got somebody operating, you've got someone who's got the scope down there taking pictures so you can see where you're going. She is extremely well published. In fact, she published a seminal paper on valves in this space. And if you look her up, you'll see all the work she's done. People refer to her paper. So she is incredibly, incredibly important. She also works at Columbia University. She's a professor of medicine. She was highly skeptical of our results. I can see Dejan nodding his head because he knows this. She was very skeptical, again, as an expert in this field who's published hundreds of papers on this topic and has measured every one of the products out there. She couldn't believe the results that we were telling her about at first. Now she's all in. But I want you to hear what she has to say. And again, she's not a fly-by-nighter. This is one of the most important people in the world. Dr. Hahn, great to see you. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
I'd like to talk about your recent experience. You attended the cases that we did recently over in Georgia, and just to get your feeling for the overall performance of the valve and the patient outcomes.
I mean, I was really impressed. I have to be very honest with you. Obviously, we've implanted a lot of valves, and the control that you have with the positioning and placement of the valve was really quite easy and very consistent. And the other thing we noticed was, or I noticed when we were doing the imaging, is that independent of the amount of oversizing of the valve, the leaflets did not exhibit any pinwheeling at the tip. So what happens when you have a long coaptation zone for some of the other valves is that there's a lot of extra tissue. And so, the way that they're cut, it's just, they're designed to close with a minimum amount of overlap. Enough overlap, but a minimal amount. And then if there's a lot of overlap because of the oversizing, then the leaflets start to pinwheel, they twist a little. Really easy to see on echo, and there was no pinwheeling. So it really, I think, speaks to the design of the leaflet itself, which was impressive to me. Again, we believe that the lack of pinwheeling and the fact that it just opens and closes very smoothly, no pinwheeling, no twisting, may actually be advantageous for durability. The other thing we noticed was really the gradients were very, very low. I mean, they were, below 5 millimeters of mercury fairly consistently, 3 millimeters of mercury. And so we don't often see that, particularly in other valves, particularly if ventricular function is normal. So you have a normal amount of flow going across, you typically are going to see a little bit higher gradient. And despite normal left ventricular function, we really didn't see high gradients, which meant that the calculated valve areas were large.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Dr. Hunt. And my question was going to be about the hemodynamics and valve performance, particularly the smaller annulus patients.
Yeah, so I think that that's a huge advantage because remember, we're going to be undersizing somewhat many of these small valves, or you're going to put in a small valve. And so then one wonders, how well they'll do with either the tremendous, I think I said undersizing, but really oversizing the valve. The valve is going to be not going to be fully deployed because it's going to be in a really small annulus. And in that setting, we typically see higher gradients. And so either the design of the valve, the smaller valve, or the fact that we've, it's so oversized that the leaflet hemodynamics is not optimal. We usually see a little bit higher gradients in those smaller annuli patients. We didn't see that with these either. So we did a lot of females, and they tended to have smaller annuli, and we continued to see these really, really optimal hemodynamics.
Yeah, and so that leads to the next question, I think. What is the potential clinical implications of this new technology, this new design?
All of us have talked about durability because the ACC/AHA guidelines have now allowed us to kind of make a decision for patients at the age of 65. That's pretty young. And so now we're going to make a decision as to whether or not they should get a TAVR or a SAVR at the age of 65. And our goal is to perhaps limit that young patient to one surgical procedure. The better we're able to plan for that lifetime management of these young patients. Certainly, it becomes kind of a slam dunk for the older patients, since the hope, again, is that this valve will really perform well and for a long period of time.
Yeah, thank you. So here we're talking about the more chronic phase of treating this disease. Finally, I guess, how do you see the uptake in the real world once this product becomes available? And particularly with regards to the early stage, the acute phase post-treatment, as well as the chronic phase for durability. A little bit more on the short term, how do we see this in the real world compared to what's available?
The upside to the self-expanding valve is indeed the hemodynamics that seem to be so nice and optimal for valve-in-valve and for small annuli. And the choice is often made to use a valve that has those optimal low gradient, big valve area hemodynamics. And on the other side, you've got the performance of the balloon expandable valve, which is extraordinarily reliable, easy to place. It's relatively fast to put in a balloon expandable valve. It has low paravalvular regurgitation rates, tends to have very low pacemaker rates. And so there's all of these advantages to that balloon expandable model. And now all of a sudden you start to think, well, if you could combine the strengths of both of those valve types into a single platform, then wouldn't that solve many of the issues? And indeed, that's, I think, where we're hoping this valve will position itself, because the hemodynamics are so fantastic that we've seen so far, and yet it has the ease of the and reliability, accuracy of the balloon expandable valve. And so again, kind of combines all of those things in a really well-designed valve. So the single leaflet design, but the molded design, the fact that it's, again, may be a more durable design and durable tissue is something that becomes extraordinarily attractive. That's what I believe. I wouldn't say it if I didn't believe it.
She's, as close as you get to celebrity status in this space. And if you're ever in doubt as to the legitimacy of what we say about this product or the data we put out, you cannot doubt that person, or both Marty Leon and Rebecca Hahn. Not only do they work in the biggest institution in the world for this stuff, but they are the most widely published and are experts in the space. What does it tell you? It's as de-risked as you get. This is going to be the market-leading product in this space because people can't match the results. And there's a reason for that, by the way. But first I want to just touch on something that Rebecca mentioned there. She talked about valve and valve, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about valve and valve because it's an important aspect of this product and this treatment area, that has not been articulated. It's a very recent phenomenon. Because you need to look at this product really as two products. One is aortic stenosis, all right? That's the 15 billion Aussie by 2028, but I think it's a much bigger market because there's a lot more patients. On the back of that, which is not mentioned in that forecast by the analysts, is about 30% of patients who need a second valve on top of the replacement valve they're getting today. And there's a reason that's just coming up now. It didn't come up 10 years ago, and I'll come to that reason. But right now I've just got, nope, I haven't, okay. You let me know, Andrew. This one in particular, that adds what, 3 billion US, 5 billion Aussie to this market forecast already. There is only one product hands down that works well in this space. It's DurAVR. We know that to be true already. We've done the science. We have friends in the regulators who want this out there very quickly because there is a big problem with patients who have gotten their first valve and have failed after 3 to 5 years. So I mean, getting one of the competition DurAVR, TAVR valves, that valve after 3 to 5 years has failed, and you have to put a second valve in there. Okay, so now you're talking about a third valve because the valve you're born with has failed. You've got another valve in there. You're going to put another one inside of that when that collapses. Imagine that you've got a circular vessel, and it's getting smaller and smaller because there's more junk in there. So when that second valve fails, it's a very restrictive area. It's a salvage outcome. It's not a great outcome for the patient. Basically, you're just trying to keep them alive at that stage because you're trying to stretch a valve into that little opening. Now, we've already done some experiments with all the major surgical valves. So patients are getting surgical valves as well as catheter-based TAVR valves, and compare to the competitors. And you'll see every single time we did this, because of the design of this valve, it's very different. Remember, this is the only valve that's designed this way. All the other ones out there are very different by design. We're getting higher EOAs, and this is putting it inside. So we're putting it inside the Magnaries, putting it inside the Mosaic. These are surgical valves, but this is the market-leading surgical valve. We also put a Sapien in, which is the number one TAVR right now. We put an Evolut in. So you see the difference between these products when they're inside of that valve compared to the DurAVR. You're getting, again, normal results in the salvage therapy, which is unbelievable. Right? This is a bad situation to be in, and we're still getting EOAs above 2. So that's incredible. Mean gradients, you are going to be working with a very restricted area in this design, but we're still getting gradients below 10 when we're inside of these products. And again, you see it compared. So these studies have been done. They're being published right now because they're incredible. It's breakthrough data. And you'll see the DurAVR in the blue every single time. When we're bigger than the others, that's good. When we're smaller than the others here, because if you're looking at EOA, you want to be bigger. If you're looking at mean gradient, you want to be smaller. We consistently crushed it in a very bad setting. Now, this is a real problem because the regulators didn't know that, that these products were going to fail in these patients because they were putting them into older patients who would die before the product fails, right? That's only very recent. Here you see what Rebecca was talking about, pinwheeling. You see the shape of this valve here. This is the market-leading valve right now, pinwheeling. This is inside a valve-in-valve setting. So again, you see this kind of data, and you see this really nice kind of Mercedes thing happening with the DurAVR. That's what your valve should look like in your body right now if you're healthy. Should not look like that. Coronary access, I probably won't get into that right now because I think we're going to have somebody join us in a minute. But the hemodynamics is so poor when you've got to go valve-in-valve. PPM is patient prosthetic mismatch. It's a terrible thing that we're being able to measure that these valves also are not working well in certain patient groups and have start to fail very quickly. And Rebecca talked about pinwheeling, amongst other things. Pinwheeling it decreases durability. It puts a lot of strain on the valve. So you don't need 50 years to work out durability. But we're seeing this now is because the TAVRs were originally designed for this patient here. They were designed for older patients because you couldn't crack open their chest and put in a surgical valve. They would die on the table. The valves were never fantastic, but they didn't have to be because this patient is probably going to die in 3 to 5 years. It matters because you don't see the bad outcomes because that patient's going to die before the valve does. And that's what we've seen. Since 2019, the FDA, you saw that in the opening video, the FDA approved the use of these products in younger patients. We got lucky with this. But that means patients are getting it at this age. And why does that matter? Because they're going to live a whole lot longer. So they're going to live long enough that you can see that valve fail, where we didn't see it with the older patients. We didn't really know about it. So they're going to live, minimum 15 years. More importantly, they're going to be more active, right? This is young. They're playing golf, they're playing with the grandkids, walking around the block, whatever they're doing. So cardiac output is up. So you have an increased cardiac output, your heart's working harder. Remember what I said earlier, this is a disease of symptoms, right? So if you can't exercise, everything slows down on you. If you can get normal blood flow, great. But that valve's going to wear out, and you see, that's why we see this 30% of patients getting valve-in-valve now, because since 2019, you've got a big group of patients hitting the 4-year mark. And that's why you see it now, and that's why it matters. We didn't know about this when we developed the product. We just knew that we would get every other patient out there who was treated for the first time. Now we're going to get every one of these as well. And that's what every physician's telling you. I'm going to pause it there because we've got a little bit of a surprise. I've got a physician from Australia who kindly agreed to join us this morning. I didn't know if he could because he's right now working with patients. He is the only Australian physician who's actually implanted a patient with DurAVR, so I thought it'd be really important to have a chat. Andrew, can you bring Carl up?
Good to see you, Wayne.
Good to see you, Carl. Thanks for joining and taking the time. I really appreciate it. I was just explaining to everyone in the room that you're obviously working with patients, so I appreciate that you came out and did this. By introduction, Dr. Poon is an interventional cardiologist. He's part of the global advisory board, so he works with our team in the US of physicians, part of that team. He's the only physician outside of the US who's actually had the opportunity to implant a patient. But Carl and the team and I discuss results constantly. And of course, the idea is to expand the use of this product and the training of physicians. Carl will help head that up down here in Australia as we get towards having patients down here. But Dr. Poon, as part of the Global Advisory Board, can you just give the folks in the room a little bit of an impression about the kind of results we're seeing with DurAVR at the moment and certainly relative to what's available?
Thanks, Wayne. So I think it's really been a privilege for me to be part of the team. I remember we've been talking about this for quite a few years now. Obviously, you have a very promising tissue technology with proven track record. How to translate it to a successful transcatheter aortic valve platform, and being part of the implanting team has been an absolute privilege. I mean, there are two main aspects that I learned from the whole implanting experience, really. I mean, the first one is the absolute superstar clinician team that you've put together. I think for us implanters within our little world, you have an absolute superstar team, and to be invited to be part of that, it was quite an experience for me. I think these are the absolute most renowned, experienced operators you can put together. You look at your advisory board, it's the absolute superstar of our world. But I think in the background, the second part is even more important, to be able to work with the engineers, and particularly Jason, when we were in Tbilisi. I mean, I could see how passionate he is, how, with all the little feedbacks we have, For him, his brain is ticking along, trying to look at dealing with the problem, moving on, and then the next iteration. And I suppose to that end, it's a very nimble environment, very attentive environment. I mean, I've done first in human for other devices as well, but the engineering team and the background is absolutely superb. And I think that's reflected by the result, isn't it? From the first time in November 2 years ago, and then last year when I was there, and then now, you can see the improvement, both in terms of access, sizing, pretty much, to be honest, all the problems that we thought of this time last year when we were in Georgia, they seem to be all solved by the latest cohort. So it's, for me, as a clinician, I've been extremely impressed with how problems are solved in a forward-looking manner so that this is ready for clinical practice, hopefully soon, or at least in a trial setting.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. And I just explained to everybody here that Jason Quill is our head of engineering. When you're in medical device, you have engineers that make all of this stuff, working with the physicians. He's a PhD in biomedical engineering, so certainly a very qualified individual. But as Dr. Poon points out, the physician advisors, of course, are the best in the world. I would say, Carl, the engineering team is definitely up there as the best in the world as well. They're incredible. So you mentioned Tbilisi. I don't know if you had a chance, you've seen the cohort 3 numbers that we just did. Unfortunately, you weren't able to make it. What's your impression of the current data? I just basically, by the way, showed the audience here the cohort 3 results. We looked at the DVIs and the EOIs and the mean gradients. But what's your opinion of the third cohort?
Well, I think this time last year when I was there, it was impressive. I think for other clinicians who've never been involved or never seen the data, you just got to be there to look at the valve, look at the leaflet and the numbers. It's quite astounding. I think when I was there were, 13 implants altogether thus far. But what's already quite obvious as a distinct advantage is the leaflet motion. There's much less flapping around, and as a result, probably better for durability. But the leaflets, the valve just looked more laminar, okay? And I think, the latest result, again, is reinforcement and further improvement in terms of mitigating issues such as paravalvular leak and central leak and making it all percutaneous. So, we talked about when it's ready for pivotal and the next stage of research. It certainly looks very promising now, looking at the latest cohort.
Yeah, thank you, Carl. And then finally, how do you see the future of this product in clinical practice once it becomes available in the real world?
Wayne, as a trialist or scientist, as well as a clinician, I had my doubts originally, when I signed on, when I joined, and seeing its progress over the past really 12 months, 18 months, it's been enormously promising. And quite frankly, as you know, perhaps better than me, when I go around, when I talk to other TAVI specialists and high volume operators, people know about what Anteris will bring to the table, okay? Low gradient, large area, as well as potentially longer durability. And you're essentially combining the best of a balloon expandable platform with, supraannular self-expanding hemodynamics. So if I have to design a valve now, these are all the boxes I want to tick, the best of both worlds. So in terms of its coming to clinical practice, I think if there's something as good as that, absolutely, this could be a game changer.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. And I think that this is probably one of the very few products out there that has been really physician designed from the ground up, including the delivery system. That's why we're getting the things that you just talked about, because you've got user perspective that is able to bring the strengths of what's available and kind of engineer out the weaknesses of what the current therapies are. So, Carl, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. Hope to see you very soon. I'll let you get back to your patients, but thank you again.
Thank you, Wayne. Thanks, everyone.
So again, you hear from a physician how this product looks in the real world. Dr. Poon at Prince Charles and St Andrews, I believe, is again one of the highest volume operators in Australia, so his voice matters. As part of the global team, he is seamless, shoulder to shoulder with some of the biggest names in the world. He works alongside of them in the OR. So hopefully you've got a perspective of how this product is so completely different to what's out there. Hopefully you've got a belief in what you're invested in, that this is a product that is coming to market. The risk of clinical failure is zero. We've got superior clinical results. We've got the validation and endorsement of the highest names in the world in this space. It is a global product. We are working in a global environment. But there's some steak knives here. We've been up to other things as well. Let's talk about those. Obviously on the podiums, I talked about Marty Leon before. This was the most recent Congress. We're hitting the Congress season now for medical conferences around the world, and they're big. And I'll tell you why they're big. You get clinicians, of course, from all over the world that attend these, and a typical conference is going to run for 3 or 4 days, and it's back-to-back hundreds of scientific sessions, right, that people will attend and ask questions of. And physicians present like Dr. Leon is doing here. Not only that, and particularly this guy, in his session, you have every analyst from New York who's in medtech. They attend these congresses because they want to know what's going on. They already talk to us, and they talk to Edwards, and they talk to Medtronic. We know them all. But they will sit in the audience and hear what he's got to say because it matters. And of course, on the back of that, you have executives and employees from the major companies in the audiences like we are. And we're all seeing each other at these meetings. This is our advisory board meeting, whatever that was, 2 weeks ago. This is Janar, the physician who did the research I showed you on valve-in-valve. He's, again, one of the leading guys in the world. And here you have Sushil as one of our trialists, also Columbia. Joao is one of the preeminent echocardiographers in the world, and Chris Maduri just hidden there. There is so much volume around what we do. We had 4 podiums at this meeting, which is unprecedented for a small company. And people were coming up congratulating me. We know a lot of people who were just coming up. It was such a buzz about what was happening with this product in terms of the data. It's all data-driven. One of the things I haven't focused on in the past, and I'm going to do this real quick, is the delivery system. We talk a lot about the valve, right? And we have a superior valve. We have a superior design. We own the design. And it's all got to go on here and get into the patient without cracking a chest, right? So you insert the catheter in the femoral artery, it goes up over the aorta, drop the valve in, take the catheter out. This thing gets thrown away, right? And it's that easy. It's not really that easy. This thing gets thrown away at the end of it, and yet it probably makes up 50% of the decision the physician's going to make as to how they use it. And balloon expandable, that's this thing right here. There are 2 kinds of TAVR. One is a balloon, which we have. That's the market leader. People prefer balloons because they're very predictable, and I'll explain that. The other one is called a self-expanding valve. That's the Evolute. It relies on radial strength or radial force of that frame once you put it into the vessel. So there's no balloon pushing it out, so it is unpredictable. They jump out, they pop all over the place. They're not easy to use, but in a smaller annulus patient, it's a good outcome. The valve also sits a little bit higher, so you get a little bit wider opening. But in spite of that, people prefer the balloon because once you get that balloon inside, you expand it, it's very predictable. You're not relying on the frame, you just pump the balloon up, you put the amount of pressure that's required, it's not a random number. Depending on the patient's anatomy, you have a certain amount of pressure. Then the valve expands out, then you deflate the balloon and pull it out and throw it away. This is the only physician-designed catheter in TAVR in the world. This was designed from the ground up. We pulled them together with the engineers years back from day one and said, you guys tell us what you want. And they did. And they will all tell you, including Carl, that they haven't had that before, and that's why this thing works. Again, user perspective. Now, I'm actually going to show you a very quick video as to how this works. So hopefully you get a good perspective of how the procedure works. That part matters. Now, when you leave this room, by the way, it's at the back of the room if you saw it coming in. And I'd also appreciate your input as shareholders. We have two kinds of packaging up there. The remit with this product way back when was that these products, by the way, in the hospital are really ugly. They look nasty, they look cheap, and they're charging $35,000 for them. Our remit was to make this, which doesn't cost additional money, make it look like it meets the promise of quality of our product, and they did it. They nailed it. Packaging is true also. Packaging is usually white or grey and ugly. Our packaging is at the back. We are, at the moment, deciding between the blue one and the blue and white one as a company. Now, you may not know it, but the TAVR comes in multiple boxes. There's a valve, there's a catheter, there's a thing called a crimper, which puts the valve onto the catheter. Everyone has all these same bits. There's an introducer sheath. So all the boxes are up there, they're numbered. There's a piece of paper up there. When you leave, I would appreciate if you can just mark whether you like white, just put a tally stroke at the back, or blue. We're actually going through this process right now. I'm not going to tell you my preferences, I have them, but then I was part of the team that designed it, so I'm biased. Now, you just saw what it looks like in a rendering. I want to show you what it looks like in a patient. Right, this is a DurAVR and a commissure going around the aorta, so you can see the steerability. This you may not be able to grasp how critically important that is, but if you can't get round here in a nice controlled manner, it's incredibly difficult, and you're going to bounce off the aorta and probably do damage at the same time. So that's inside of a patient. Here's where you see the camera, the scan, and here you see the balloon expanding, just so you get a concept of what that looks like. The valve is here. It's collapsed at that point, right? Then you expand that balloon, and it's different every time. It depends on the anatomy of the patient. You get the valve so it's deployed, so it's now pushed out against the vessel, and then you deflate the balloon, as you see there. So one more time, we'll expand. It's really important, this even expansion too. It's really, this balloon part has a lot of IP. It's really important. It's not just a balloon. You collapse it, and you're out. And then you withdraw the whole catheter. It's quite ingenious. So what else we've been doing? Oh, well, this is the one that's most important, I think. We've been working on this one for about 4 years. There's a bunch of really smart people named on these patents. I'm named on one of them as well. But these two came out in the last month, give or take. We've got a lot of patents, of course, around ADAPT, around the catheter, really a bunch of them. But this one really changed the landscape, and this is the one I was really really hanging out for, because it protects the biomimetic valve. We are the only single-piece biomimetic valve out there. We get the results because of that. You can't copy that. And now we own it. If you never thought about, what does a multi-billion-dollar patent look like? It looks like this. We actually have two of them. You can see these slides online later, but it basically gives us exclusivity. So there's two different patents that we've got here, just around the design, that give us exclusivity on certain aspects of the shape, the way it's molded, the way it's manufactured, and so on. Really critically important. Every other valve out there is a three-piece valve. This is a single-piece valve. This looks like the one in your body. That's the differentiation. Three-piece valves do not look like the one in your body. That's why they give suboptimal hemodynamic performance. And there's been no introduction into this space for 30 years. Right? This is the first new class of valve in 30 years. So again, it's very, very dramatic in terms of what's been achieved here. On the back of that, our facilities in the US, you all know that we've got a factory here in Perth that makes ADAPT. We've got two facilities in the US that also have all of these testing machines. Valves go in here and get tested for fatigue and stress, so we have a lot of these. These ladies here are manufacturing the valve. I actually got the opportunity to sit with them about 2 weeks ago, and they showed me, and I attempted to do it. It's impossible. Absolutely impossible. I'm all thumbs. It is such an exacting task. There are sutures that go into these valves. So if you're one of the Edwards valves, a market leader, there are people doing this that have to put 800 stitches into those three pieces of tissue. If you get one of them wrong, you throw it away. One. Right? And it is so exacting. They were patient with me. I appreciate that. Man, it was hard. So these are all validated now. We're FDA approved. We're good to go. We have to make valves for our studies. So the material comes in. The valves are made here in the States. We do the final sterilization, and they go out. It cuts, obviously, a lot of time than trying to get it done down here. So critically important. We could move up to commercial scale to a point with the current facilities. in the early stage. So if we had to do that, we're good. We're ready. Okay. The other thing we've been doing, and this came out after the last AGM. I didn't get to talk about it. You just saw these amazing patient results compared to the competitor. But what's never been seen before is this one. And you might, those of you who follow the company online might have seen this recently. Carl was talking about it. Rebecca Hahn was talking about this recently. But beyond the EOAs and the mean gradients that I explained to you, we have this thing called flow. This is about how your blood goes up your aorta. When you've got aortic stenosis, that blood flow is disrupted. When you put in a different TAVR that's not ours, that blood flow is disrupted because they're not designed like the valve in your body. So that blood is going to shear off the side of the aorta. It's going to create back pressure on the ventricle, which is a problem with this disease. What's never been seen before, apart from all the other things I've shown you, is that a manufactured valve can have the same results as a normal valve. And you're looking at 2D MRI, so you see a really good result. What you're seeing is it's a column of blood filling that circle when the ventricle is contracting. So here we've got an untreated healthy valve. You don't need to know the anatomy, just know that when that red circle is full, that's good. That's normal, that's not treated, that's a healthy patient. Here is a DurAVR patient, and you see the same. The numbers here reflect that. But you'll see the same thing, perfect laminar flow. This is incredibly important for the long-term outcome of this disease. Certainly for the left ventricle heart failure kind of conditions will get better. What was really interesting in this data is that you have a severe untreated valve here. See how that's just a quarter of that's just not really filling a circle. It's very disrupted flow. This is the market leader, and that was tested. It actually has worse flow reversal rates than a sick valve that has yet to be treated. This wasn't known. Right? These patients are dying because they're in their 80s originally, but this has long-term and short-term clinical impact. Right? It's stunning, but that is a function of not having a valve that looks like the valve in your body. It's not a normal valve. Medtronic, the other valve on the market, not as bad as this one, of course, but it's still not normal. And then surgical. I showed this Magna-Ease valve before. A lot of patients have this. Is the market-leading surgical valve. It was always considered that a surgical valve would give you better results than a catheter-based valve, because you get your hands in there. The surgeon can place the valve better. And yet, it's the first time a TAVR has been shown to outperform a surgical valve. So if you need it any more convincing, there's not much else I can say on that. I got this last night at 4 a.m. Pankaj Gaj is a clinician in the UK. Has been working on flow, again, a flow expert, and he literally sent me this overnight. One more time, 4D MRI, not 2D MRI, 4D MRI, perfect normal flow. Never been seen. He was so excited. I'm jet lagged, so I was awake. Got his email, thank God. Could get the slide into my deck. But these results are unbelievably compelling. This is one of our 12-month patients. So at 12 months, you're maintaining that normal flow. That's about as curative as you can get in this space. I think you get the picture. This is just showing how these valves are so different. Our valve is so different to a competitor product. Rebecca Hahn, Dr. Hahn talked about the coaptation area. That's the length where your leaflets come together. Should look like a hand praying, which ours does here. The competitor valves kind of snap at the top. That creates all sorts of different flow problems. And you just saw that little animation there showing you how normal this valve looks. Now, we've been up to other things. I don't want to say we're not focused. We're incredibly focused on what we're doing. But we've had the opportunity to look at some very, I would say, low-cost, high-value projects for a couple of reasons. One, you got to look to the future, right? We've got to see what we're going to look like 5 years from now. And two, certainly in the space, structural heart comes down to two things, aortic and mitral. I'm going to talk about those mitral in a minute, the mitral valve. We've been working on this collaboration for a couple of years. Professor Needling's working. This is a company in Western Australia. One of the things about these valves, I showed you the ladies making the valves there. It's very labor intense for every company out there. I'm personally of the opinion that they won't be doing that 10 years from now. And I'm surprised they still do it that way, but it's the way of the world. In pharma, where I came from, where you launch drugs, you have your second generation ready to go before your first generation's out. That hasn't happened in TAVR, and that's why we've had this opportunity to get into this space with a different product and put IP down that no one can copy. We are working on alternate materials. I'm not going to say this one will get over the line. It may or may not, but I know we have to do it. This one is injection molded. What's really great is it's a company that makes the tympanic membrane, the membrane for damaged tympanic membrane inside the ear. So it has the same characteristics as the collagen material we use for our valves. You can injection mold it. You can snap these things out in 10 minutes. So your cost of goods, this is a business perspective here. And it may not be this one. We're looking at a lot of alternate materials, but I think it's really important. What's critical is we make it like a DurAVR because we own this design. So you're going to get the same hemodynamics, right? So you're getting a DurAVR valve potentially made from material we can injection mold. It'll certainly bring the cost of products down. It may or may not be a product that we can introduce into some of the developing markets as well down the track, or it may not go anywhere. But it's past proof of concept right now. So all these things matter. We've got to keep taking those shots on goal. They're very low cost to achieve. You would have seen the announcement recently. We took a position in V2V MedTech. This is a physician-run company looking at the mitral valve space. Mitral valve is here. So it is the valve we treat is right here. That's the aortic valve. The mitral valve is behind that. It's very difficult to treat. It's in a very difficult to get to position. It's a big market. It's around about 4 billion Australian dollars. There's a couple of products out there already. The physician we're working with is Vinny, Dr. Pabat, who's also working on the DurAVR side. He would be, again, top 3 mitral surgeons in the world. So he's well-known, well-published, all those things. Again, a physician perspective on a product. He came to me and said, look, we've got this idea on this. We do it every day of the week. We can see where the problems are with existing products, and we've got an idea. Yes, it's blurred for a reason. All right, so we know what the idea is here. We're still filing some of the IP. I can show you what's available. Our friends here at Abbott, St. Jude, and our friends here at Edwards are in this space. So you start to see our portfolio, mitral and aortic valve. Whether we go all the way ourselves, whether we become acquired, it becomes extremely attractive. This will be a DurAVR, make no mistake about it. We will be in animals in the next 6 to 9 months, give or take. Because we've already got engineers working on stuff, we've got facilities to do this now. It's not like it's an additional cost or headcount. We actually have the infrastructure to support it, and we're working with these physicians every day of the week. So they're all motivated. I love the idea of it. Certainly, it doesn't hurt when you can take on these guys again. I quite enjoy that. But you see this market is growing significantly. US, roughly 3 to 4 billion in Aussie terms. On the back of that, we have a ton of partnerships out there. And these are really important partnerships. When you look at some of the names on this chart, not only are these folks that are working on our EFS and our clinical studies, they're working with us on the design. Cleveland Clinic, the biggest cardiac center in the world, the biggest in the world. The director of Cleveland Clinic is working on our EFS study. Incredible people. But they're also doing studies that are not necessarily in EFS. We have Yale University is doing a study on valve science. So we're progressing this discussion along flow and everything else. We're taking the argument to a place the competitors cannot take it, acknowledging they have patients out there. They've already got patients, obviously, for quite a few years, but they can't get the clinical results we've got. We know we've got to develop that discussion. So the question is, where do we go from here? And if you're of the belief that this product is coming to market, one way or another, it's coming, then you know in a $10 billion space, which I say is bigger, there's really no limits to how big this product is. It's not a pipe dream. I think one of our shareholders said it was a dream. It is not. It's a reality. And the reason that we've been able to do this is we started life with this tissue science. It is top 1, top 2 in the world. 55,000 patients have this material inside of them. It's not a startup. So you need that. You've got to have competitive tissue science. If you don't, if you try and enter the space now in TAVR without this, forget it. You're not going anywhere because these products calcify. You've got to have anti-calcification treatment that is proven. We do. Valve design. We own the only new entry in this space in 30 years in terms of design. There's been new entries, but we own the only change of design, and we have the IP around that. And it's because of that design we get these results. You can't get them with a 3-piece valve. You've got to get them with a biomimetic valve, which is the valve that's in your body now. It's the only physician-developed catheter, right? And it shows. It works that way. You heard Carl talk about it. So there is nothing that is a dream here. It's a reality. It's not a fluke when you put these 3 components together. These are the 3 important components of a TAVR device. It's not a fluke that we're getting the results that we're getting. We've had a long list of deliverables that we've delivered over the years. We're way past the proof of concept stage. This is no longer our risky proposition from a clinical point of view. 21 patients is a very legitimate number. We'll have probably 40 to 50 by the end of the year when we finish the EFS. The EFS has started. We are doing all of the site tours. We've got everything set up. It's ready to go. Patient selection is underway right now. So I know I get caned for using the word imminent, but it's imminent. Joe gets it. And here's a rough timeline. This has changed. I want to add to this a little bit that we're kind of in this phase now. We have a target to read out the EFS by September. We're on track for that target. But what's come into the middle of this is valve-in-valve. We are getting attention from the regulators and from the doctors, particularly Marty and his group, to introduce another arm for valve-in-valve because there is a massive need, and hands down this will be the product. Even if you take that as $3 billion, 30% of the market, that's huge. That's not where we're going to stay and play. We're probably going to get the lot, but that speaks to the design of this valve. So I get asked this one quite a bit, what are we going to do here? Well, they're all different. They all have different paybacks for shareholders. But I can tell you this hand on heart, one of these things will be 100% true in our future. They have a different value proposition. Partnerships, I did a lot of these in the pharma industry, they work really well. And when I talk about the companies we talk to senior management of all the companies you know the names of. It's not that we'd like to talk to them or we bump them once in a meeting and say we spoke to them. They text me. They talk regularly. They all know what we're up to. We know them. Our physicians know their physicians. These discussions are ongoing. We are doing a constant dance with the big companies. So it's legit. We're talking to them all the time, including just last week while we're overseas. M&A, that's the one that people are like, when's that coming? Well, we've been doing dances with these companies for a couple of years. It doesn't just happen overnight. But we are certainly known by the analysts in New York and all of these guys. They know exactly who we are. They see Marty Leon talk about our product. M&A, I think, returns the lowest value. But in the near term, some folks might find that attractive. I've been given verbal offers for the company in the past. They're not of a value that I would bring to market. Keeping in mind, this is a $10 billion space. I say it's bigger. This is clinically superior. You've heard the doctors at the highest level tell you that this is the product that's going to get used. What is it? $3, $4, $5 billion product, right? The Edwards product is 3.5 right now, and we've just wiped the floor with that one. So if you do a multiple of that product, it's a big number, way, way beyond where the market cap is today. And that said, you then risk adjust what's the development phase. There's no risk of this product coming to market. It's just a function of time and money. But it's not 25 years away, right? We are in the final stage of going to getting commercial approval ourselves. So an M&A makes sense, but the closer we get to approval, the higher that value has to be because they're bringing in a $2, $3, $4, $5 billion portfolio product. Going it alone, people always panic. If you haven't worked in commercial healthcare globally, this might seem like a big proposition. It's not. I've launched a lot of drugs. My team have launched a lot of drugs. The guys in management at Anteris are not, they're all global folks from big drug companies. The process to bring a drug to market is about 25 steps. Same for a device for most part. We're at step number 10 already. If you know what you're looking at, if you're from the industry, you already know that we're already going alone. We're 10 steps into it. This market is very compact too. You don't need a huge amount of money. The advisory board we've put together already controls about 25 to 30% of the market. In their immediate network, another 50%. So it's not like a huge undertaking. We know exactly what steps we have to take here if we went alone. Of course, the value of going alone is massive, right? Because you start selling and that market cap is being driven, and then you're cash flow positive. Partnerships, I like these. I did quite a few of them. I was involved in a big one at Roche. Typically, you're going to have a company run alongside of you, co-develop, maybe co-commercialize. This one gives the second highest outcome, this gives the highest outcome, this gives the third outcome. They're all good outcomes, by the way. Like I said, one of these three things will absolutely happen 100% in our future. So I think I'm drawing to the end here. The investment thesis, you guys can work it out. The current market leader has 65% of the market, right? So think about market percentage points. It's not like we're sniffing around for 10%. They've got 65%, and we've got clinical superiority at this point over that product, and all the physicians are behind us. This matters. You heard Carl talk about these guys. Dr. Poon just talked about the level of physicians we work with. They're incredible. And they are, it validates the product when you hear these guys talk. Key investors between New York and Australia, a lot of physicians in these investment teams. Again, very, very important. Clinical results are what they are, and I think the market is much bigger than 10 billion. Well, there's more patients than that. If we went to market, less than 5% would give us 250 to 300 million US dollars, probably in the first 12 months. All right. Now, we've done this with spreadsheets. It's not a made-up number. We looked at the coverage, we looked at the doctors we work with, and that's what we can get. All right. You're cash flow positive at that point. So I just want to give you the reality of where this all heads. And again, this is not 25 years away. All right. This is in our future. The procedures are concentrated in centers, so it's not like you have to cover the universe. There is 20 centers that cover most of the volume, and we cover most of those centers already. And again, the advisory board is, you know, these are the guys that drive the volume. They're the highest volume users out there. So that's the end of the story. I want to now flick to the Q&A. I'll try and keep it quick. I know I always have long AGMs, but I want you guys to get the most out of your tickets when you fly interstate. There is, I'm sure most of you know Hot Copper. So there's a band of our wonderful investors on Hot Copper who talk about the company and have put together questions. There is one individual who does this every year, and I really appreciate it, although I get a lot of email from investors, and last year I outed him, so I'm not going to do that this year, Joe Doyle. He tells me everyone knows that it's him, so if you're on Hot Copper, this is the man. Now, what I've done here is just taken all these questions, Joe, and just put them onto a slide. The ones I've scratched out are the ones I've covered through the presentation, but there are some I wanted to address. The CABG update. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's coronary artery bypass graft. The ADAPT material lends itself to other areas beyond TAVR. We did some preliminary studies. You know, when patients have coronary bypass, there's not a lot of good products out there. They take a vein out of your leg usually and use that. It's very painful. So there's a market there. We've proved the concept in animals that we can adapt this material and do bypasses. We did a carotid study. It's not gone away. I'm just not pursuing it right now because we've got to focus on the big dollars, and we're doing that. It's not that we're not going to pursue it in the future. There's definitely something sitting in the background. These others, cash burn, valve and valve revenue, we've discussed all of this. NASDAQ listing, yes. Again, I hear companies on the ASX talk about, I'd like to be on NASDAQ. That's not us. There is a regulatory process you have to go through to be on the NASDAQ. Documentation, you have to have a 3-year gap audit from KPMG. Now for us it'll be 4 because we have to do another year. We've done all of those steps. Okay, those steps have been achieved. So we are well down the path. The reason we put it on ice last year is because the markets were horrible. You do not want to try and do this in a bad market. It's going to be very bad for the stock. Will I come back to it? We're moving so quickly. There's a lot of other things happening now. I like the NASDAQ. I was on a NASDAQ board myself in California, but it's a big pool of capital. However, things are moving so quickly around us, I'm just not sure. We can flick the switch on this because all the hard work has been done. So more on that later. Mitral valve, I talked about that with the V2V. EFS study, I've got this one here. Costs and timeframes. Yes, the EFS study is a very small study. It's 15, 20 patients. We might add valve and valves to that. It's minimal cost, but keep in mind we got a Category B designation for our studies from the FDA, which means that the product is fully reimbursed at about $25,000 to $30,000 US dollars and the procedure. There's another department you have to go through to get that fixed, but basically this means the product is reimbursed and the procedure costs. Doesn't mean it's completely free, but we do bring in revenue for these studies. Overall, the study costs will be very nominal. And again, I think some folks think about drug companies where you have a 5,000 or 10,000 patient study. That's not what this is. And they're not reimbursed, ours is. So it's a very different risk profile. This one I wanted to really address. The product is measured in years, not months. That's actually incorrect. This product is measured within 48 hours off the table, and I showed you that. Yes, we can measure the outcomes in years. That's the durability story. But keep in mind, when we talk about superiority, we're talking about when that patient gets off the table in 48 hours. That's why this is an awesome product to have, because we're not waiting. We already know that it's superior. So I wanted to just correct that one. Early access in Australia, Dr. Poon, who you saw before, will be pivotal in helping us get special access patients here. And we're working on that. I want Aussie patients, of course. So we're working on that. EuroPCR we talked about. Strange movements on the stock market, yes, we look at that constantly. You will all have seen this change in substantial holdings that come up and down. Steve Denaro is the co-sec, and he has to lodge those things. He goes out of his mind every other day because he's putting these things and trying to get these announcements. There's a lot of shuffling going on between these accounts. Nothing too nefarious. We watch everything very carefully. We look at the sales absolutely every day, and our house brokers have been pivotal in helping us understand these things as well. Cash flow, we talked about. Code Red. I thought I'd long since stopped talking about Code Red. This was a very different company, 120 people. None of them are here anymore, and there's a reason for that. But it was a different kind of product too. It was a less sophisticated product. Most of the folks were based down here. Anything you believe is true in some small caps were probably happening here, and we certainly saw that. That is not the culture of the company. It's not allowed to be the culture of the company, but we run a very lean team. 67 people achieving what 2,000 people take to achieve at Edwards. You get it. People are working, but they're motivated to work because of what we're achieving, not because we crack a whip or they have choices of where they can be employed. Sorry, EFS. No, I think this question here was really meant to relate to the pivotal study. It could be that number, never that number. So when we get to the registration study, again, fully reimbursed. Securing capital, was there a plan to avoid rush capital raising? I'm not going to lie, this one got up my nose a little bit. Because we have raised at $8, $15, $24. We're up 200% in 18 months on the raises. So I don't fully understand what that means. But of course, you want to raise at higher prices, so we've been doing that. EFS, this one, advancing device, yes. We'll end the year with 40 to 50 patients. General discussion around pros and cons of going alone, we just talked about that. They all have pros and cons, right? And it depends on your appetite for risk and how much you believe the story and what we can get done here. Long-term ramification for shareholders, well, it's very simple. If you get bought out in an M&A, you would take your money and it's game over. Company is sold. If you partner up, you're going to bring in capital from the partner, watch the stock price float up and bring the product to market. You'll get to ride that. Or if we go alone, you'll get to ride that one as well. So they're very different outcomes. Can we retain for ourselves if partnered? So, well, again, it depends on the deal. If we sell the company, no. If we partner up, possibly. Yes, to this one, we could partner DurAVR and keep territories. I've done that in the drug industry. You take North America, they take Europe, and so it goes. I like co-development because you actually get to use other folks' resources to get stuff done. Given our enormous potential and likely possible interest from multiple major players, what's the possible catalyst? Okay, you don't force anyone's hand in this space. We've been working with all of the companies out there for a good couple of years, and it's a dance, it's a negotiation, but when we talk about the fact that we're interacting with these companies, it's legit, we're talking to them. This one I thought was interesting. It doesn't change, the management changing doesn't change our product. That's a company that needs our product, for sure. There are other companies that need our product, but these guys are the ones that certainly are going to be feeling the pressure of DurAVR. They already are, by the way, they're already feeling it. And the final question was complacency and apathy around CardioCel. Again, we didn't have complacency and apathy. We have a fantastic partner in LeMaitre, it's a NASDAQ-listed company. We had to build a brand profile for the product that didn't exist. We did a really great deal with this product. But so there never was complacency and apathy, but I think in the structural heart space, there's whatever the opposite of that is. There was so much interest in our company and our product. So that brings me to the conclusion. And I want to thank you for your attention. I know I like to tell the story, so I get through a fair bit of information here, but there's a lot of thank yous we really need to get, and the first one is our patients. 21 patients, these are folks who have choices, and based on their informed consent and the physicians, they decide that they will participate in DurAVR studies. And hopefully they often leave looking like that, I can tell you. There's a board behind me and in front of me and next to me, and I would say, John and I joined the board together. You heard from John before. You'll hear from him at the end of the meeting. This guy is Mr. MedTech from Minneapolis. His networks, his knowledge, his contacts have been so helpful for me. I mean, I came in from a different space when we started this. And so John is very highly regarded and very well respected on the US side in medtech. Dr. Gu is sitting here, and Steve also just being great sounding boards and partners. And when you're running the job I am, and you're obviously around the world and you're stretched and there's a lot of hours involved, it does help to have sane people around you, just to help you bring you back to where you need to be. These guys here, I've got to publicly thank them. David has worked with me for many years. David was my right hand at Merck. He came across stupidly to Anteris to join us here. He lives, of course, in the US. He's from Boston. Matt is our CFO sitting here. I'm going to embarrass him. I had dozens of CFOs at Merck working for me. This is the best CFO I've ever had. Not only do I say that, but the external auditors also say that when they work with him. So you should feel very happy and very comfortable that you've got this guy here. And of course, Chris, many of you have seen Chris on video. Hopefully next time I can bring Chris down. He's our CMO. He is so highly regarded from all the guys you saw on those screens. People love this guy. He's full of energy. He works 26 hours a day. He's still a practicing clinician. He's doing 300 TAVRs a year himself. And yet we're doing patients, we're doing cadavers, we're doing animals. We're, all the time we're working. And so Chris has just been wonderful. We have this incredibly diverse team. This is not our old Admetus group. This is just a different group of people. We've got the Aussies up here. We've got the folks in the US over here. Professor Needling here. Just an incredible group of people who work around the clock. And I don't take that lightly. They really put in a lot of time and effort for us. Finally, we've got our physician advisors. These are incredibly talented people, highly regarded. And we've now got, obviously a strong cohort in the US. I talked about Cleveland Clinic. Mike Reardon, again, top 2 or 3 in the world in this space. He's very well known if you Google him. The Europeans, we love working with them. And as you saw Dr. Poon before, and this Australian cohort as well, in anticipation of getting patients down here. We just have the best people out there. And of course, you guys, always thank you to the shareholders for what you do, for the support you give, whether you're buying, selling, or doing both. I get the great pleasure I have in life is to be able to interact with shareholders. I get a lot of email. I love responding to it. I love getting it. Often there's really good questions. Sometimes questions I, of course, can't answer, so people get cheeky. But, most folks know what they can and can't ask me. But you're a great group of shareholders. Now, when you're invested in a company that treats patients and has achieved what this company has, you're not dealing with widgets. You're not dealing with a hole in the ground. This stuff matters, and we're saving lives with what we do. So thank you very much for your ongoing support. Our big funds have been fantastic. I do want to call out to our brokers, our house brokers, Evolution. I would say this, I've worked obviously with a lot of brokers. I've never had brokers who work as hard as these guys. And I know often shareholders kind of put their nose up. I see that sometimes with some of these brokers. But these guys they go through the movements on the stock with me all the time. They measure, they monitor, they buy into rounds personally. They're really big supporters of the company. So they've done a fantastic job. And it's no fluke that beyond the results that we've achieved, that the stock has moved as well, just because it's being managed better on market. So thank you to those guys. And finally, I want to thank my family for putting up with me not being around a whole lot. They're online watching. So to that end, I will bring my presentation to a close, and thank you all for your attention. Now you get to do the exciting part, because John's going to read out the resolutions for us. So thank you very much.